Okay. So this will be an oral history interview for the Wisconsin COVID-19 Archive. The date is May 4th, 2021, and the time is roughly 11 a.m. The current cases for COVID are as follows. US cases is 32,228,003. Wisconsin cases is 599,576, and total vaccinations for Wisconsin is 36.6% of Wisconsin population fully vaccinated and 46.3% half vaccinated. Could you go ahead and state your name for me?
Sam Kuehn.
Okay, how old are you?
I'm 22 years old.
Okay, can you give me your race and your gender?
I am Caucasian and I am male.
Awesome. So, what are the primary things that you do on a day-to-day basis? What's your just daily routine?
Uh, Primarily, I go to school full time at Eau Claire, and that's pretty much it. I occasionally work once or twice a week.
What do you study at school?
I study creative writing as a major and communications as a minor, integrated strategic
Huh.
communications.
So the exact flip of what Nick does. That's really
Yep.
interesting. I did not know that.
Yep.
Okay, great. And you said you work sometimes. What do you do sometimes?
I have two jobs actually. One of them is a subcontracting job where I do painting and manual labor, and the other one is working at the local library here in Fall Creek. Yeah.
Nice. So you live in Fall Creek.
Yep. I live in Fall Creek.
What is it like to live there?
It is. I like it. It's a good distance from Eau Claire. It's only about 15 minutes, so it's quiet. I like that a lot. But it's like if I need to go to Eau Claire to like get things I can't get here. It's an easy commute. I commute to Eau Claire anyway. I live in Fall Creek, so I commute to class, I commute to work, all that stuff. So I'm always, going from here to there most of the week. Even if it's just like for hanging out with my friends or something, I'm going to Eau Claire. So it's like a nice balance between small town and city, I guess.
Have you found that you've been in Fall Creek more than Eau Claire since the pandemic started, or about the same?
I would say a little more in Fall Creek just because all of my classes are online except for one.
Hmm.
I would normally be going to campus every day, obviously, for my in person classes, but just how it was laid out this semester, I had pretty much all online classes.
Hmm.
So normally I'd be going to Eau Claire pretty much every day. Um,
Hmm.
I end up still going to Eau Claire most of the time during the week just to run errands or go skateboarding or other things like that.
Hmm. And just generally to kind of bookend our talk about the COVID pandemic, what issues have concerned you most with the pandemic?
Me personally,
Hmm.
um, that's a broad question. I would say primarily is like the end of the pandemic. Obviously, is in the forefront of everybody's mind, including mine.
Hmm.
Also, relationships with family and friends, because it's like after not seeing some people after a while, it changes the dynamic of that relationship, especially like family members. I have some grandparents who live in Minnesota, and the restrictions are much different here, or were much different, or sorry, there than here for quite some time, and they were pretty concerned about COVID and like seeing other people, which was hard because we don't get to see them very much at all anyway as a family. So that's one thing that was affected. So just like the relationships and like seeing other people, interacting with other people, friends of the family, even like my sister, she's out in Colorado, so like seeing her is tougher now just because of the restrictions that were on. She's in the military, so that they had a lot of like restrictions as to like what they could do and who they could see.
Hmm.
Um, so that's like one big thing for sure,
Hmm.
that I've kind of noticed. I guess living in a smaller town, it's less so of a like a conscious issue in terms of like people being affected by it because it's like there's much less people, much less activity, everyone's spread out, so I guess that's less of a concern per se if than if I was to live in like a bigger city like even Eau Claire. I mean, I don't, Eau Claire's not huge, but it's there's like other populous centers like anywhere in the cities or Madison, Milwaukee, anywhere like that. I have friends who were you know all they did was stay in. They were staying inside all the time. They didn't hardly do anything at all, and it's like they were telling me how they haven't seen their family or their friends forever, or people who like live away from their family too. It's like uh, people who are going to school right now and their family lives halfway across the state or something. Um, but so it's kind of been like a mixed bag, I guess, in terms of issues with COVID. Other than I guess like relationships with family and friends and like personal health. It's that's those are the big ones I can think of too. Um, nobody in my immediate family, including myself, has had COVID
Mhm.
at all yet, so that's good. Obviously, I
Yeah.
thought I did at one point, but it was not COVID.
Uh-huh.
It was in fact, say a sinus infection.
Mhm.
So,
Did you have to
um,
get tested and quarantined for that?
yeah, yes, I did. I was actually that proved to be a interesting experience because we were actually on a road trip to Tennessee for we were camping essentially, so it wasn't like we were going out to this big thing, but it was we were camping and we were driving out to Tennessee and we were like halfway to Tennessee and I started feeling sick and I was like, hopefully this is COVID. I'm like, the symptoms are there, so we stopped where we were and we were in a hotel and stuff. So I was able to get a test within 24 hours, and then about a day later after that, we confirmed the results were negative. So that was a big relief, obviously. But it was like we were acting like, what if I had COVID? So it was more of hanging around like we couldn't change the fact that we were already on the road and like in the hotel, but it was like I didn't go out or anything and I had to stay in the hotel all the time and my parents were they were like, oh, we're gonna go like get some food for you or whatever and stuff. So it was just that like short time period of even thinking that I could have had it threw a wrench into the whole
Yeah.
situation just because like we were on the road that really messed it up. But thankfully it wasn't an issue
Mhm.
at all.
Has that impacted how you've thought about COVID since then?
Um, I would say I've always had this sort of underlying thought about it that's related in a ways that um like we've had like family friends and stuff that have told us that relatives of theirs had it or they had it. For example, my uncle had it, for example, and it's like to me it's like the common denominator between all those things is like there's going to be some big change in their lives in some way. But for like more often than not, I've heard like, especially from other family members of mine, that they had it and it was like just an inconvenience for them more than anything.
Hmm.
Um, like my uncle had it, he had no symptoms whatsoever, and he just simply had to stay home from work, and he still was doing stuff around his house, which was, you know, interesting to say the least. Uh, then we had some other friends of ours who had some relatives pass away because of COVID, and that was more so, you know, uh, due to pre-existing conditions that they had, and they were much older, I would say.
Hmm.
But I guess overall, my thought process hasn't changed a whole lot from, I would say, my personal experience first, and taking into account others who like I know, friends, family, etc. Um, I suppose, living in an area with less people in a smaller town, it's bound to be that way anyway, just because it's like you're sort of stuck in your hometown or in a smaller surrounding area with less people, less interactions, less things like that, I guess. So that's probably why it hasn't changed a whole lot, I guess.
Hmm. You touched on your relationships with your family earlier. Would you mind telling me just a little bit more about how exactly those relationships have been affected for you?
Yeah, so like I said, my sister is she's in college at the Air Force Academy in Colorado right now, and she's been away. She's a sophomore there, so it's her second year at the academy. So she's been away for a significant amount of time already,
Mhm.
and we've gotten opportunities to visit her in the past for like a few days. But one big thing that changed was like when COVID got really serious this past couple like 6 months or so, or more. My parents went out there to visit her. I could not go because of conflicts, but they went out to visit her, and they made the whole trip out there. They drove out there. They were able to get on on the academy grounds, and then they saw her for like a minute, and that was it.
Mhm.
And it was just tough because they were hoping to like actually spend time with her and see her, because she has very limited opportunities as it is to actually get off of the grounds and do things. She's incredibly busy, and the military is pretty strict with the scheduling, uh, even without COVID. So
Mhm.
the days that she can actually see her family are very limited. So that was one thing that was really tough. She would call us much more often, like via Zoom or phone call or whatever. Um, and because like kind of the atmosphere at the academy was a kind of a downhearted one. There was some student like suicides at the academy just because of the isolation. They couldn't leave their rooms for like a month or something. It was insane. It was incredible. And like although I didn't experience that firsthand, just hearing about it
Yeah.
was that's incredibly like saddening and tough. So it was like obviously we were concerned for her and her well-being there, and she's fine. She's fine and stuff. Things are much less restricted now than they were, but that's one example, I guess, for like immediate family relationships, long distance especially.
Mhm. How often do you see your family, or do you live with your family?
I live with my family, or my
Okay.
parents, I should say. I live with my parents. I have always lived with them per se, my entire life, obviously, and that will change in let's see, after the fall. I will graduate in December,
Oh,
and I
nice.
will move out at that time, or about then. I would say I've thought about moving out. Nick asked me to move in with him at one point and stuff, and there were some other like friends of mine that were like, "Hey, we should get a place." And I thought about it, but at the time I just wasn't financially like ready to do that. And I was like,
Mhm.
why would I do this now when I'm going to move out in like less than a year anyway? Like, why would I pay for that twice?
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's like really, there's a lot of, although there are drawbacks to living at home and having to commute to Eau Claire, there's also a lot of benefits of it too. It's like I don't have to pay
Mhm.
rent or anything like that. I can make food anytime, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. It's interesting living with my parents because it's like I spend time with them obviously, a lot more than I would if I didn't live with them, of course. And as a result, I'm also spending time with a lot of their friends who are like closer to their age as well. So it's like I'm interacting with older adults most of the time anyway. I hardly spend any time at school. I'm just online, obviously, like I said. So it's like there's an interesting dynamic that's sort of different. Like my sister's out of the house and I'm just here. So I just feel like another adult at the house. I mean, I am, but it's like it's different. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's interesting. So I am spending a lot more time with them, and I'm especially like cherishing that because I know that there are people who are at like school, for example, who are like much farther away from their parents, and um, can't see them for whatever reason, if it's because of school or COVID or just distance, whatever. So I'm appreciative of the time that I get to have with them and spend with them, um, too. And
Mhm.
they're older in age, and they're in the well, my dad is especially in the risk group, for age at least, for COVID. So that's kind of put a spin on the whole relationship too. It's like although we haven't been affected by COVID at all, um, it's just like thinking about the possibility of that too. It's like that's a possibility that we would have to reckon with if that ever came to be. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Would you say the same goes for like relationships with your friends? Like how often do you get to see them?
Yeah, it's sort of been a toss up with that. Like, there were times when um, a lot of my friends were pretty cautious about hanging out and spending time together, because, like, I had heard through them, that other people that we knew mutually had COVID or got it or something.
Mhm.
There was actually one time where a friend of mine and we went bowling, like, months ago probably, and there was no rule that said you can't go out at the time, but it was still kind of like at the height of COVID cases in Wisconsin and stuff. So we were there, we were the only people at the bowling alley, and we left, and then we were notified after. It was like, you possibly could have been exposed to COVID. However, we found out later that it was like the time slot that apparently you could have been exposed to was not at the time we were there.
Okay.
So thankfully that was not an issue, but we were a little concerned about that
Yeah.
afterwards, to say the least. We're like, that's not good. But it was strange because there was nobody else there, so it was like, well, who could have had COVID there? But
Mhm.
um, anyway, so and there's like some of my friends are much more like relaxed about how COVID is now. You know, I especially like some of my like less like like friends that I've gained in the last couple year or two, not associated with like high school friends, because like I would say my friend group primarily is very like closely knit from like high school
Mhm.
classmates, I would say primarily, but then I have a lot of other friends who are like, I met through school at the university, or just out at the skate park or something like that. And that's an interesting dynamic too, actually, because like when we're outside at the skate park, we're obviously we're outside and we're sort of distanced from each other. We're not like huddled up together or anything like that, but it's like just the like weirdness of like, can I like shake your hand or like give you a fist bump, or like, are we doing the elbow thing, or like, what's the
Mhm.
deal with that? So it was kind of weird. Like, for a while, it's like some people were like, no way, like, don't stand next to me. Some people were like, hey, what's up, bro, give it a high five type stuff.
Mhm.
So it's sort of interesting to see that. And it's like, I think now it's sort of becoming a little more relaxed, and everybody's kind of like, it's not like an awkward thing anymore to like wonder about that, like who wants to like hang out or not, kind of stuff. I have some other friends who are still kind of concerned about hanging out and spending time, and I kind of go, I'm sort of I'm basing my judgment as to what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, mostly based upon my own personal opinions, which are a result of the I mean, they're affected by the state mandates, obviously,
Mhm.
um, and stuff like that, and other national rulings as well. But I would say that amongst my friends and myself and those that know me, I think we're all sort of trending towards a more relaxed state in terms of spending time together and like doing things together and like seeing one another and stuff like that.
Mhm. So how did the bowling alley experience? So you were contacted after that you
Mm-hmm.
could have been exposed. How did that possible exposure kind of influence how you view other establishments? Like are you still like comfortable just like going out?
Um, it depends. Like, there are establishments that I'm like, I would not go to just because of the amount of people there, and um, it's sort of a case by case scenario. I would say, like, I would feel more than comfortable with going to the skate park to like outside. I feel like that's a safe decision. Um, but like going to, say, like a bar on a weekend with a bunch of people.
Mhm.
I mean, for one, I'm not really into that. I don't really go out that much, but at the same time, uh, especially because of COVID, I think that's kind of a concern, not just for me, but for other people. It's like, I know other people are definitely like more concerned about it than I am, but knowing that, I know there's a lot of people that have zero concerns whatsoever,
Mhm.
um, which is like, I would put myself somewhere in between that spectrum. It's like I don't have zero concerns, but also it's like I'm not hyper aware and super concerned about absolutely everything related to COVID. Um, just for like a very uh, simple answer to that question, I guess. And it's like there are a lot of like there are other things too. That's like I would go to these establishments whether or not there was COVID, just because of like church, for example. That's a big thing in my life, is
Mhm.
important to me. Um, I don't see, like, if a bar is open for people to go to the bar, then I don't see why the church shouldn't be open for people to attend church with some reasonable like precautions. Like
Mhm.
that's my view of that. So it's like there are things that I would choose to go to, um, partake in, like a leisure activity, say like skateboarding, or hiking or something like that, or camping. And there are things that are much more like important to me, like church, or say like visiting family, socially distanced, or what have you, things like that. So there's a contrast there, I guess.
Yeah. So you have like a more like moderate stance on everything.
Uh, yeah, in terms of COVID, yeah. I mean, I would say I'm being cautious, but I'm also trying to be realistically optimistic, about the whole situation. Uh, Not to like say that like it's not an issue, or it's not a problem for other people, or anybody at all, because obviously it is, clearly.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, to simply answer that, I would say, yeah, I'm sort of taking a more moderate approach
Mhm.
to that.
You mentioned your church.
Mhm.
So how long? So has that been opened at all, or has it been closed the whole time?
It has been open. There was a time where it was closed, and we watched church service via um, uh, Facebook Live or whatever it was, which was a much different experience, especially because as like a Catholic, I, partaking in the Mass and receiving Holy Communion is a big part of the service. And it's like, actually being there and receiving communion is much more different than, saying a spiritual communion prayer, because it's not exactly the same thing. Um, so that was kind of a tough transition, from, at the beginning of COVID, going from there was no problem to all of a sudden we can't go to church. And it was very frustrating to me when there were other establishments that were open, and churches were not open. That was something that I was frustrated a lot by, because I felt like that was sort of unfair in terms of like, you know uh, just the like priorities of, whoever was mandating that these establishments were open while the churches were not open, or other establishments were not open. It's like just the disparity there was kind of frustrating, as somebody who is, who goes to church regularly and stuff and practices their faith. But now we are open, which is great. And I know that there are other parts of this United States that are not open, or the churches aren't open, I should say. Um, and I have a couple friends, across the nation who have said, it's like it's hard for us to like find, excuse me, hard for us to find like a mass to go to. It's like sometimes they'll go to a different church to see, like, maybe they're open, or maybe the restrictions are more or less or what have you, which is interesting to note as well. Like there are some local parishes that are much less restricted than certain other ones, uh, which is, I think, interesting too, because then people can choose based on whether they want to, like, have those restrictions in place or not, or to a lesser extent, I should say. Um, and Uh, it's good now that we have the church is like the church I attend is open and stuff, which is nice. But there's also been a lot of like there's been a lot of other issues too with just like every like COVID is affecting businesses and things like that, and the church is not exempt from that either. Because it's like we're still struggling to like get back to where we were and be able to fund the things we need to fund and pay the people that work there and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of
Mhm. Do you know if the mandates for church closures are from like the state government or if they're from Eau Claire itself?
well, from what I understand, this could be completely wrong, but the mandates that are in place right now are from Eau Claire County, because the mask mandate for Wisconsin was struck down, I believe, or like the continuation of the mask mandate. And that's just one aspect of it, I guess, because there are other counties in the surrounding area that have, little to no restrictions or mask mandates in place at the moment. Um, and I believe so those mandates would be affecting all the parishes in Eau Claire County, which also too the parish I attend is a part of the Diocese of La Crosse, and so the bishop of the Diocese of La Crosse, will issue a letter to all the parishes in that diocese, and there will be like at the beginning it was like here are the standards of like what we should be doing as a parish to combat COVID. Um, and they looked slightly different for each parish because it's like every parish is a different space obviously, but there was some kind of like overarching like guidelines from the bishop for the Diocese of La Crosse, which is a part of Eau Claire County but also other places. So there was kind of like some weird overlap with that. It's like the state mandates and then also here's like some guidelines from the bishop, with that. And then also too, it's like Eau Claire County versus like the entire state. That's interesting too, because it's like there was some, or even like municipality stuff too. It's like, or like individual businesses. This is kind of branching off of your question a little bit, but it's interesting to see like the statewide mandates come and then you have like businesses that say like no way, we're not going to do that, we're a private business, we can do what we want. Or you have businesses that or institutions like the university that say you must wear a mask at all times on our property regardless if you're indoors or outdoors, which is uh, not aligned with the or the mandate of the governor, which said you do not have to wear a mask outside, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like there's all these like spheres of I don't know, institution, business, community, like leadership, all kind of like coming together in this weird way to like so there's some like there's not ambiguity but like sort of like confusion as to like what's the priority here, like who are we listening to versus
Mhm.
like what, I don't know. It's interesting to see like the both the like union of those ideas but also like some of them like clash with each other a little bit. um
Conflicting, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
um
You kind of touched on this, but if you could talk more about how, just thoughts on the difference between local and federal leaders and how you think that's impacting your community.
uh let's see. That's a good question. I mean, uh, with the election of the governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, I think there was a lot of like hope that there would be more sort of mindfulness when going into like the pandemic. When the pandemic came, it's like everybody was sort of expecting what happened with the mask mandate,
Hmm.
or I would say the majority of those people would expect that. But then it was curious to see uh, the Wisconsin Supreme Court strike down the repeat or the continuation of the mask mandate for the state of Wisconsin. which I sort of expected that to happen. Um, in a way, I would say like in a town like, as small as Fall Creek, we have uh, pretty like-minded leadership here for the most part. You know, the um, trying to think of a way to explain this. The uh, the community itself is so small. It's hard to like um, think of any sort of like overall sentiment for the community, because it's like there's obviously going to be people who believe certain things and who don't believe certain things in terms of like what they should do as an individual for COVID, and like what the town should do. But it's like for a town as small as Fall Creek, there's like not much of a concern, I would say, uh, versus somewhere like Eau Claire, where there's a lot more people there. There's a lot more disparity in terms of like economic, or like anything like that, and just like different people who have different opinions on everything, and people who just like don't care, like they just have no opinions at all.
Mhm.
And also too, it's like a different age group as well. It's like you have all the college students in Eau Claire, which is like a pretty big number of people.
Mhm.
So their opinions are they matter, and they hold as much weight as a community member, because in a way the college students are invested just as much as the community members are, because they're partaking in a lot of the same things as the community members are. And also, like people who live on campus, they're living in Eau Claire full time essentially. Um, so it's sort of interesting to see it, like the comparison between the community of Eau Claire and the students, if there's any sort of difference at all, or if it's all pretty much a similar sentiment. Um, I guess from what I've noticed, that you know, Fall Creek is just being a small town. It's predominantly more conservative leaning. I would say for sure. And Eau Claire as a city, especially, I would say is more liberal leaning in a way. Um, and there are individuals in both uh, communities who are sort of against the grain, I would say, um, which is interesting to see. It's like, um, uh, I don't know. It's just curious. I'm just curious to like see how that plays out, I guess,
Mhm.
in terms of COVID
Yeah.
across like cities and counties and stuff.
Mhm. And federally, what do you think about um, the last presidency, but also the current presidency and how they've been dealing with COVID?
Mm-hmm. I think the previous presidency was dealing with it in a way that was somewhat necessary. Um, I would say. I also feel like it was like there was a transition period, obviously, to President Biden now, which sort of I was obviously going to usher along some new like standards of how things operate. I mean, that was a given with the president being elected, but also like you'd like to think that nobody really saw this coming in a way. Uh, so if you go back to like the start of COVID, and it's like leading up to now, the guidelines that were set in place during the presidency of Donald Trump were in some ways a foundation to the guidelines we have now, because if we had absolutely nothing, then we would have to have just came up with brand new things, strategies at the start of the Biden presidency. I mean, they did change a lot, like a lot of standards from what I had heard. But at the same time, it's like there was some transition period from one president to another. It's like obviously there was like major differences between like their beliefs about COVID and their strategies, but I think there was a lot of like also similar sentiments there, whether people like to admit it or not. Just because it's like it wasn't it wasn't such a stark contrast where it was like we did nothing, and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we're doing everything under the Biden presidency. I think in both cases, they would. I mean, there's always like more to be done per se. I think the priorities are maybe different between the two, and like who's to say like what one would have done in the other person's shoes, because we can't really like go back and say like, oh, if this guy were president, he would have done this, or if if Biden were president back then, he would have done this, or if Trump were president now, he would have done this, or what have you. So it's like it's a lot of just like guessing as to like, oh, that's that doesn't pay to like guess about that stuff. It's like if there's any sort of like semblance of like unity at all in like the transition between the presidents in terms of like mandates for COVID, like then we were bound to be where we are now, probably. Like who knows what's going to happen in the next couple months or year or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be
Do you
interesting.
have, sorry to interrupt, do you
No,
have
you're good.
any like general thoughts about what you want the government to do in the future?
Boy, that's a broad question. I'm assuming we're talking about the federal government.
Yeah.
In terms of COVID, or just in general. In terms of COVID, I would say the that's a tough question. I wish that realistically, the federal government cannot determine what is or what should be set or done individually for each state, because that's like up to the governor of the state, obviously, and there's statewide mandates for that reason. I just feel in general that the federal government is being more reactive rather than proactive in terms of COVID, just in a very like vague statement, generalized statement there. It seems to me like there's no like I don't know. It just personally, it just feels like there's no forward movement in this in what's happening right now or what's being done. I mean, obviously, I can't speak for every person, or like I've only like I've been to other states in the time of COVID, briefly, and it's just it's curious to see like what they're doing versus what we're doing as a state to like either combat COVID or progress as a nation or do whatever. It's like you hear on the news, it's like some states have completely like gotten rid of their like lockdown mandates and mask mandates and everything, like Texas, for example, and they have a much lower rate of COVID cases at this moment. And it's like, that's not necessarily a correlation thing, maybe, but at the same time, it's like we're doing what we can now, but I'm wondering in the future, like what's going to happen in the next like 6 months, or like is there going to be a continuation of these practices after COVID is done, or will it ever be done? Like those are the questions I'm sort of wondering about, that maybe I'm not knowledgeable enough to answer those questions, obviously, but I would say overall it just there seems to be a lot of like like I don't know how to say this without sounding bad, but
Go for it.
there are the COVID is, of course, it's an issue, and it's a big issue. It's something we haven't faced since, I don't know, probably like the Spanish flu in like the 1900s. I don't know. So, I don't know if it's fair to compare it to that at all. But it's like this is sort of definitely a thing we weren't prepared for as a nation, I would say, in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people who uh, are sort of at the beck and call, like they're waiting on bated breath for the government to say, okay, you can do this now, or like it's safe to do this, which is, if that's what makes them comfortable, then that's their prerogative. But at the same time, there's a lot of like media hype and like people being uh they're just people are scared, and like rightly so in a lot of cases, because COVID has claimed a lot of lives, of course, and that's a scary thing for a lot of people. And it's left a lot of people without jobs and things like that. I was affected actually when I lost my job when COVID started. Thankfully I've regained that job now, but um I I just I from what I've heard from people, it's like some people that I've interacted with, it's they just have no hope for the future at all. It's like this doom and gloom, and maybe that's a result of what they've experienced because of COVID, and that's unfortunate. And I don't claim to think that they're, or I'm not saying their experiences are invalid, or their what they've experienced or lost is invalid. Um, you know, uh, and I've lost I lost my job at the beginning of COVID, and we had some family members who were affected by COVID and things like that. No deaths, thankfully, but I just it pains me to hear people say it's never going to be the same. The world's going to be this terrible place, like and it's like the world, it just in general, like I hear people say that and they just have like a pessimistic attitude about the whole thing. And I don't want to say it's not going to be better than it was before. It's not going to be perfect, obviously. And like it's not going to be like normal or whatever, like people are saying the new normal or whatever. And it's like I think trying to normalize what's going on right now is tough, and it's sort of a reach that I don't think is necessary, just because it's not normal, first of all. Um, and secondly, it seems to me like if we just normalize what's going on right now, we're going to have a much harder time getting back to any semblance of where we were before, because people are going to, with the attitudes they have now, or like the dependencies they have now, that's not going to last and like forever. It's like if people have this doom and gloom attitude now, and then in like 6 months things start to look up, it's like, like, are they going to change their mind? Is it going to be like, are they still going to be pessimistic? Or like the people are depending on stimulus checks to afford things and things like that. But also the stimulus like bills and the money is also going to a lot of other things as well, which is like not even related to stimulus money for people. It's completely not related, but that's not the point. But um, there are people who are receiving the stimulus checks who are, they don't necessarily need it. It's like they're not in dire need, and there's no disparity between the people who like need it and don't need it per se. And that's not really like the problem. But if we have people who are using, like, depending on that as a crutch, it's like, when that's gone, is that going to set them up for financial instability in the future? Is that going to like what is that going to actually be a benefit for them? I don't know, honestly. But I think that the normalization of what's happening now is kind of uh, a concerning thing. I feel like there's a sort of complacency happening a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because it's been a year or over a year that this has been going on now, and people are sort of getting used to the mandates and getting used to interacting with people over Zoom and getting used to all these social distance rules. And that's great because it makes it easier for everybody else, in businesses and schools and what have you. But also it's like the experiences that people have based on all this time, it's gonna change the future completely. Because like you have students who are either going into high school, going into college, or young kids who are just starting school that are dealing with all these things. Um, and it's completely changing the way they're experiencing their first time, in school, in high school, in college, whatever. There's people who are missing out on opportunities that are not happening now because of restrictions. I mean, but it's like those things, some of those things just can't be helped at all. Um, just because of the situation of like world relations and everything like that. But there's other parts of it that I think could be, I don't know. I'm not saying like we should do something to change this all of a sudden now because we're still experiencing COVID, but at the same time, it's like, what are we gonna do after? Like, are we just gonna like? There has to be some exit strategy that's proactive, not reactive. That's happening after COVID, and it has to be seamlessly like integrated between the time where it's like downtrending, 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 downtrending across the world into like, okay, here's some semblance of what we had before COVID happened. Is it going to be hard to like recuperate from that? I'm sure, but
Mhm.
I just feel like we're just being really reactive to it right now, which is, I don't think, a good strategy, in
Yeah.
my
So you,
opinion.
you want more like positive outlook for what's going to happen, both
Yeah.
like socially and also like economically, like more
Yeah,
positive things.
economically, socially, not just within the United States either. Like,
Yeah.
looking at the world, because I think that's part of the problem. It's like people get so stuck in the sort of position that they're in currently, um, or like the city they live in, or the town they live in, or the school they go to, or the job they have, or what have you. And it's like for me, as somebody who's from a small town, I could simply shut my ears and eyes to the rest of the world, and I'd be perfectly fine doing that, and I wouldn't have to worry about XYZ. But I don't want to do that because I'd rather be informed and I'd rather know what's going on outside of my little town. And knowing the stuff that's happening in the world doesn't make me feel like, oh no, the world's going to end, or oh no, nothing's going to be the same, or oh no, what happens if X happens. Like, to me, as a young person who is exiting college in a short time, there is still this opportunity for me to go out and do whatever it is I want to do in the world without having to think my life is going to be terrible, or like this is going to affect my life in a negative way, which it may, but at the same time, it's like a realistic possibility that might happen. Like, if I can prepare myself for a realistic possibility of A, it's going to go bad, or A, it's going to go good, like objectively good or bad, like really generalized terms of good or bad,
Mhm.
then, I should be, at least mentally and emotionally accepting of those things, you know. Um, because like I've talked to people, just in like in my community and at school, and they were like, well, how can you, say like, you're doing good, or like things like that. It's like, well, I've noticed in through COVID, it's like it'll make you or break you in a way. It's like this, it's a trial for everybody. Like, I don't know one person that hasn't had been affected by it in some way, even if it's like a remote way. But it's like for some people, it was like they were at a point where it was like do or die for them, and COVID just broke them. It's like whether that's like economically, or like just socially, or like some relationship wise, if like in their family or whatever. It's like that was the last straw for them, and they just completely were like, you know they were having a terrible time.
Mhm.
And there was people that died because of COVID, um and their families are now left with, that family member who's gone or whatever. And it's like, that's a reality, that's a thing that happens, and it's and people who cannot accept those things are not going to be able to move forward in their lives at all very well.
Mhm.
um and it's not to say it's like their fault, because of course COVID is a terrible thing. It's like you can't expect these things, but you can prepare for like the worst case scenario and then go from there. Because if you can mentally prepare and emotionally prepare for those things, and at least set yourself up to do something at all, then you're going to be way better off than somebody who's like, well, nothing's going to be the same, and I'm just going to, I won't be able to have a job, I won't be able to do anything. And then it's like, with that attitude, yeah, you're right, you're not going to be able to do anything.
Mhm.
and it seems kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Oversimplifying the whole thing to just say, oh, you have to have a good attitude. But really, and that's like such a cliche thing to say, but like real, like I've talked to other people who are like, this amidst all the chaos of the world, for some reason, those people were like, I'm doing much better than I ever was before. It's like COVID tested me in ways that I didn't think it was going to, and I'm better as a result. And people have, said, to me that, I'm, for some reason, I'm more aware of things I never was aware before. I took my life for granted before, and it's like now I'm seeing it in a completely different light. And I've talked to people who have said that. I've talked to people who have said the opposite. So it's kind of interesting to see how like COVID is affecting people emotionally and mentally, and sort of like their view of the future. It's like, is it going to be like good, bad, whatever? It's like nobody really knows. But
Do you think the media has a large role in how like people's attitudes are shaped?
I think yes. I mean, just generally, yes. Not just related to COVID, but media consumption in the United States has changed from like just um, traditional media vehicles and like watching television to constant feedback from like anywhere on, like you go on a computer, you get ads, you go on your phone, there's social media. It's like there's all these different avenues for like information and news and like worldwide events that are happening. It's unprecedented in terms of like technologically speaking. The amount of information we have at our command and that we can find through like news and media and things like that. But it's just mind boggling the amount of misinformation that comes about when people do not know everything that they're reading, or they do not understand what people are telling them, or they do not take the time to actually sit down and look at information, not just for like one thing, but to actually make uh, knowledgeable connections between one event and another event in like the current sphere of the world, or like any history or anything like that. It's like we have all these opportunities to look up absolutely anything and do our own like research per se. And this is like a beating a dead horse here because people talk about this all the time, but it's like people saying do the research, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't ever end there. It's like we are more than happy to just be complacent with consuming the news from whatever source we get it from and just taking it at face value and thinking that that's enough for us to be informed about the state of the world. And normally, in a perfect world, it would be that way, where we could understand and consume the news and be informed in a variety of ways and on a variety of topics. Excuse me. But it's simply not the case anymore, because you have uh, news outlets that are, very much biased, if not um, at the very least, like leaning in some political fashion, which, in some ways has always existed. But every single news piece seems like it's always politically charged. And that is maybe not inescapable. Or sorry, maybe not. It is in some ways inescapable in today's world. And it seems to be at the forefront of everybody's mind. It seems to be the forefront of every conversation and every interaction, um, etc. And it's like that's just how it is now for whatever reason. Um, but it's like it doesn't always have to be that way. It especially doesn't have to be that way when we're talking about things like I don't know, just world events that are just completely so far and away from anything politically related to just the United States. It's like there are countries that exist outside the United States. There are people that exist outside the United States who have no idea what's absolutely going on here at all. We're so stuck in our own like little things in like the world and the community. It's like to see the world and the or like I don't know. It's hard to explain. I think it's like the media is playing a big role in our lives as sort of this influencer. I'm not saying the media is like brainwashing people, but in a way, it's like people turn on the TV, they consume the news, they watch the news, they either, and then they make their decisions based upon what other people tell them to do, which is, that's how it works. But at the same time, it's like people need to make decisions based upon the judgments they make from consuming the news, not because someone told them to do XYZ or whatever. Not to say that they're wrong, or not to say that they're like completely off the mark, or not to say that they're not truthful or whatever, because that still exists. Obviously, it's not this. It would be unfair of me to say that all the news media is not true and everything's a lie and everything's a conspiracy and blah blah blah. That's not what I'm saying. But it's like I just have so many friends and family members who are just so caught up in what is going on in the United States, and that's great to know. But at the same time, it's like they're putting themselves into a panic about things, and it's not just COVID. It's like everything else is just, and I can like visibly tell they're upset about it, and like sure, that's rightly so in a lot of ways, because like if people are passionate about something, then of course they're going to be upset about an issue that they care about. But it's like they don't know what to do with themselves. They're stuck in this frame of mind, like oh no, like they told us this and now I can't do anything about it. They have no control over their own emotion or actions based upon what they've heard from somebody else. And it's not just the news media either, it's other people telling them this stuff. And it's like in some ways it's like an echo chamber. It just reinforces everything they've like known and learned from a certain perspective. Coming from a small town, I know how important it is to be informed about everything else outside of that, because it's like if I grew up and didn't like look into any sort of world events, or like read about stuff that happens, or like listen to the radio or anything like that, then I would just be in a small town listening to the same people talk about the same things, which isn't inherently bad per se. But it's like I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm just stagnant and not hearing. It's like people should be open to hearing these every possible option across the spectrum politically and like societally in a worldview. It's like people should have that worldview that's based upon absolutely every option and absolutely every case scenario, because it's like that's a possibility, that like there are events that could unfold that are a result of things that they didn't even think about at all. It's like, are you prepared to accept that? If they're not, they're just gonna they're gonna lose they're gonna lose it. Like I don't know how to explain it other than that. It's like people consume the media, consume information at face value, and then they give it no second thoughts. They're like, okay, this means this. This is a statistic about this. It's like, okay, great. Why is that a statistic? Why is that related to that? Why is that a statistic about this? What does that mean about the rest of the world? What does that mean about my community? What does that mean about this, that, and the other thing? And I'm not giving specific examples, but it's like there's no correlation between anything anymore. It just seems that way to me, at least. It's mind-boggling to me, because like we have all this information, we have the ability to easily connect these things via other sources of information and media, and via our own like judgments and morals and stuff like that. We have the ability to do all these things, but we're just not. I don't know. It's like people are more than happy with just doing what they're told, or not doing anything at all. Or some people also are like, it's the opposite. They just believe like, oh, if I just go against what everything, or if I go against everything that everybody says, then I'm doing something. It's like, but what are you doing exactly? Like, why are you doing it? What's Is it just because somebody's not doing it? Is your motivate? That doesn't seem like good motivation to me at all.
Uh-huh.
Which is that's way off the tangent of what we were talking about. But it's like, I don't know. It's in short, people need to think for themselves.
Yeah. Are there any like important issues that you think the media is misconstruing or maybe not telling the public?
Um, I don't. Let's see. I don't know about not telling the public, per se. Um, because here's what I think. I think that it's not like the media or it's like the media or like the presidency or the government, or it's like, they're not hiding stuff from people. I don't think. I think it's just the fact that there's like the public populace is oblivious to any sort of idea or like opinion or fact or anything that's not aligned with what they have heard or what they have made as their own idea based on what they have heard. People are stuck in opposing camps for the most part, and you have, a group of like people who are sort of in the limbo, moderate, whatever stage of whatever they're in. And it's like, it's almost impossible, I think, to not make almost everything that the media reports on political. It's just there's always, like, there's a saying, like, always there's always going to be a naysayer. There's always going to be somebody who's like, no matter what is reported, no matter what is said, there's always going to be like a naysayer. There's always going to be somebody who says X. There's always going to be somebody who says Y. That's just human nature, I feel like, at its core. But at the same time, I feel like the media is kind of fueling that fire, but also they're humans too. They're stuck in this like opposing thing as well, and it's not like they're some non-biased entity, because that's not realistic at all. That'd be hopeful that they would have some, little to no bias at all, not just politically, but just like in any sort of like agenda or whatever. But and there are media outlets that exist that are just, they report the news and that's all they do for you. They don't they don't recommend anything, they don't tell you anything, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it's like predominantly in the forefront of everybody's minds and on their phones. It's like you have all these different opinions based upon whatever values, et cetera. But it just seems to me that in terms of like COVID and the media, I think what is not helping is when people consume the media and the news, and then, like I said, like they don't go any further than that, because what the media is reporting, evidence about COVID or evidence about what have you, or like stories about whatever. It doesn't even have to be COVID related, but so much of it is just politically charged in a way that does it like it's not necessary. So it's like, instead of reading a statistic on like the CDC website, you're getting a reporter who says, this is like the statistic of COVID deaths in this county. Oh, and also this county happens to be more liberal or more conservative, or it's like this other added stuff, and it's like, oh my gosh. And then people think, oh, just because like that, it's this all of a sudden. And it's like it's more so, it's like people, it's not so much the fault of the media or the people or one individual group or one whatever. It's just like human nature at its finest, because people are who would rather be complacent to uh, rules and order, are following what they are told by the media, which isn't a bad thing inherently, again, but there's a lot of people who are emotionally distraught because of what they're hearing on the media, and it's affecting the rest of their decisions in predominantly negative ways. Um, like, for example, my grandparents are, you know, very much, I would say, conservative leaning people, uh, but because of the media they consume, it's contrary to everything they have, been brought up in as, individuals. So it's making them emotionally, like, they're falling for the same emotional uh, trap of, like, the the sensationalization of these events, and it's like it's just capturing them in a way that's just, it rocks their world, and it's like, you should, as an individual, be able to consume the news media without being emotionally, um, I guess, coerced in a way to like act or do something based upon that. And I guess that goes into, like, how your emotions play into, like, I don't know, things like that. That's really complicated stuff, I guess. I don't have the knowledge or anything to talk about that at all. But it's like, um, it just feels like me, like, people are uh, are so willing and ready to accept what people tell them with no regard to any sort of other, like, possibility. It's like, oh, so, oh, my headphones just came out. So, apples are red. Okay, great. Like, that's a fact, right? And if somebody came around and said apples are purple, it's like, well, that's a possibility. Is it real? No, probably not. But maybe it's I don't know. That's a stupid example, but it's like, but it just boggles my mind. It blows my mind. As somebody who comes from a tiny town, I have the easiest avenue of being complacent to absolutely everything I consume media wise. And like we don't even have television, for example, at our house.
Really?
Like, we don't sit down and turn on the TV and watch the news like some people do. So
Mhm.
we have it the easiest in terms of, I could just be oblivious, ignorantly blissful to everything that's going on right now. I could just completely ignore it, but I'm rather instead choosing to go out and look at, what does this person think about COVID? What does this person think about COVID? Why is this group or media? Why do they think this about COVID? And I have my own judgments and opinions based upon my ideals, and I'm forming those opinions based upon those ideals, um, and the information that I go out and actively look for, instead of just having it, shown to me through whatever. And it's like, I don't have Twitter, I don't have television, I don't have, whatever. I feel like those are big outlets for people to get their news and media, which is great. Like, that's great for them. But I would much rather find those things out on my own, because like, it motivates me, because, like, when I'm sitting here thinking, like, oh, I wonder what, like, Minnesota is doing for their mandates with, I have family in Minnesota. I wonder what's going on with them. Um, Instead of just having it shown to me uh, by the news, or instead of looking up Minnesota mask mandates and the first result that comes up I read and then I'm done, I want to, like, ask people about, like, what is it like living in Minnesota with the mask mandates, or like different websites, or like different, stuff like that. I want to ask people who don't live in Minnesota what they think the restrictions are like in Minnesota. So it almost motivates me more to do that, because I don't have those opportunities, than less, because I feel like if I were to just sit and not consume any media, or, and never leave my hometown and blah blah blah, um, I would just be ignorant. And, they say ignorance is bliss, but really ignorance is just ignorance in a way. Um, so, and, you get a lot of people saying, like, oh, you're from a small town, that means you don't have any knowledge about the outside world. You know, and it's like going to college. It's like, oh, if you don't believe the stuff they teach at college, it's like you're not going to understand the rest of the world and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, no, just because I don't agree with everything that I'm told at a certain, you know, if there's a room full of like 10 people and they all say the same thing, and there's one person that says something different, you know, the person who's saying something different probably is curious why everyone else is saying the same thing, and like, why does it matter? Like, why is my opinion different? And that's like a really broad example and stuff like that. I'm not saying that I'm some like maverick who like, no, I'm a unique person and I think for myself, and I shouldn't have to say that. Like, I don't want to say that because then it sounds very like vain. But um there are, and because I have plenty of friends who understand exactly what I'm talking about. They think exactly the same way. But I also have other friends who are just willing to be told what is what and stuff like that. And it's just, it kind of blows my mind in a way,
Hmm.
because it's like they were like, oh, I'm consuming the news and media and ideas that are progressive and that are not happening now, and they're new, and there's like, yeah, that's true, but it's like, it's just the next thing. It's like the next trend or the next whatever. It's like if tomorrow we woke up and 90s fashion was in trend and everybody loved it, like, would people actually wear it? Like, I don't know. I sure wouldn't. But I mean, again, another stupid example, but it's like, how far are people willing to really go to be to get information, if they're being influenced by all these like outside factors, you know? It's like everybody's influenced by something. Like, you're never going to be like uh, 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 in a informational vacuum. It's like you can't exist in that state as a human being. Um, but it's like if you have a set of concrete ideals in your head that are somewhat reasonable, you know, and if you based everything off of that, like consuming media, you know, interacting with other people, talking to other people, then you should have logic and reason behind your opinions about things rather than just like, oh, because this person said so. Because, you know, although somebody saying so isn't a bad thing, because it's like you have expert knowledge on a subject, more so than just a regular person could come up with. It's not always uh, the best option, because that person, that expert, is another human being, and they're bound to like make errors and make, you know, not just errors, but like they're going to have their own ideals that they base their expert opinion off of, because like as much as we would like to have experts be non-biased about things, in the world that we live in today with everything politically um, charged in some ways, and information being so readily available, it's like people can't help but have some kind of bias based upon whatever they're talking about, and it's like permeating every space of like society, uh, in especially in the United States and other places too, obviously. But yeah, so it's like nothing is like nothing is no, excuse me, that's not what I meant to say. Nothing is just ever, you know, just without bias in human communication, in some ways, unless it's like 1 + 1 = 2, and it's like that's like information, like, you know. But I don't know. It's just, it's interesting to me just to see the contrast there. I don't know. That's a really long, broad topic, but
Yeah. Have you had to change your news sources since then? Or like what were your news sources at the beginning of the pandemic versus now?
um, that's a good question. I used to, before the pandemic, long before the pandemic, I used to listen to Wisconsin Public Radio quite a lot. And I remember a time where Wisconsin Public Radio was not so politically biased. They were, you know, if you can even say that, I guess. Um, and over time, I've noticed kind of a shift in that. I've also, you know, I've I've consumed news media from many different outlets based upon the availability of what is available, basically. So it's like if I see a news report by Fox News, for example, like on the internet, because like I said, I don't have TV, I can read the post about the whatever's being reported, and then I can look up the same story by CNN or some other, opposing news outlet, perhaps, to see if it's like what is the parallels between the two reporting stories. Obviously, locally you have like WEAU and WQOW, which are more like, those are news stations, but it's like weather channels for the most part. And they have like I on Facebook, for example, it's like they share stories from other states because they don't have all this stuff to populate their page with, because it's like not every single event in Eau Claire is newsworthy,
Mm-hmm.
to say the least. Because although Eau Claire is a larger city, it's definitely not like Chicago or New York or Milwaukee or anything like that. So and I'm getting news sources from say like opposing media outlets. I hear things like people are like, "Oh, did you hear that this happened in this state?" I'm like, "Oh, really? That's interesting." And then I'm like, "I'll look that up later and see what I can find out about it." Um, or political candidates will often comment on other or make a statement about other political candidates based upon like some facts or something, and it's like, okay, let's look that up, let's like check it out, etc., etc. There's like figures like let's see, um hmm la, la, la. I don't know, I just there's a lot of like different sources. I can't think of like, I'm trying to think if there's like a couple like different like noteworthy like people, like public figures that I follow, I guess. But I'm trying to think of like I can only think of one person right now, but I'm trying to think of a more variety of some other people. So if I think of them, I'll mention them later.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay, so we're at 12:26. I think to wrap up, I want to touch back on, you talked really briefly about losing your job and then
mm,
getting it back. Can you just tell me a little bit about what your job was and how that was impacted?
yeah, so I worked at the public library in Fall Creek. I only had worked there a couple months prior to COVID getting serious, so it wasn't like I was losing a career, let's say. But at the same time, it's like a job I had just started in the fall of that time. It was, let's see, it would have been last year, I think, in the fall or something like that. And I had just started, and it was a new job for me after not having a like a steady job for a period of time. And 4 months in or whatever, I was in the library shut down because of COVID, and it hadn't opened back up until just recently. I my life wasn't depending on this job per se.
Hmm.
I don't have to pay rent. I don't have to, do all this stuff. I own a used car, etc. So it's like they're in, but it was still like, that's unfortunate. Like I no longer have a job. I no longer have a steady source of income. So it's like, what am I going to do about that? Am I going to look for another job? Am I going to simply go to school? Am I what am what's that? That was sort of my thought process there. Um, and I had done some very like temporary landscapes type work for some people in my town, a little bit, and then it's like when winter came, it's like I was just focusing predominantly in the time between then and now. I've been focusing more on school than anything else,
Hmm.
and I had done a little bit of like work here and there, nothing like uh, not like a full time job or anything like that at all. Um, and then most recently, I had gotten that contracting job, and now I'm back at the library starting this coming week, actually, on Friday. Um, so uh, it was, you know, to like, I was thinking like, if I lost this job and it obviously wasn't like a life ending thing for me or like a world breaking thing for me, but it still was an unfortunate circumstance. Uh, because I was just getting established there. I felt like I was starting to get the routine of things, and then now going back to this job, I'm like, I'm gonna have to like retrain into it and make sure I can do the things I was still able to do at the time. But I think more so it'd be even more difficult for somebody who would either like had a job that they were like, say like had a career job, or they were doing the same job for a number of years and now they have to completely find a different avenue to work in, or whatever. Or people who straight up just aren't able to get a job for whatever reason right now. And interestingly enough, it's like I did not receive any of the stimulus checks like many of my friends did,
Mm-hmm.
and just because I was not only was a dependent for like a long time, I was not proactive on that. I have my memory and organization skills are pretty subpar, so I was like, I'll do it later, and I just never got around to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I didn't feel like I needed it. I mean, extra money is always nice, but it's like I didn't feel like I needed it at the time. I was like, there are probably other people out there who need it more than I do. Um, but I talked to a friend of mine who lives in Philadelphia, and he was working full time at his job, and he had his roommates were not working at all, and they were making more money than he was because of the stimulus checks. And it's like, that's kind of incredible and strange to think about in a way. So because it's like, I would have the fortunate ability to, if I receive the stimulus checks, I would probably try to save a big chunk of it, but I could spend some of it on things that I probably wouldn't need to spend money on at all, you know. Um, so having a job or not having a job for that short amount of time was kind of, it was like, wow, I should be looking for a job and stuff. And it's not like I was living on the streets or anything, but it's like I still need to pay for things
Mm-hmm.
and like live my life and stuff. And so it was tough for a short amount of time, but I'm not not saying it was anything compared to the like loss of other things that people have experienced, but it was uniquely uh, challenging and for my situation, I suppose. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thankful that I have that opportunity to get this job back, and I also have that other job now too, which is great. And it was also a little tough balancing this new job with school because it's like I'm devoting a lot of time at home to classes, and some of the classes I took, especially last semester, they were asynchronous, so I didn't have to like physically show up or attend an online lecture
Mm-hmm.
at a certain time. So my schedule was all kind of derived from my own like schedule at home and like time that I had to allocate for that. And I'm pretty bad at allocating time for things or significant or enough time for certain things. So I tend to kind of back myself up into a corner or double book myself when it comes to time. So trying to say, oh, I can work this day, but then I have all this other homework on this time. I got to find out time to do that. So it was like I was sort of scheduling my homework around my job and my job around my homework, and it was just really all up in the air. So that presented an interesting, or not interesting, but sort of annoying challenge,
Mm-hmm.
um, which thankfully hasn't been too much of an issue because of school is sort of winding down a little bit, but also winding up because of finals. But that's coming to an end pretty soon here. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that in the summer it will be way more easy to just focus on it's like school, then job in the summer, and just whatever else that comes in the summer. So yeah, so that's sort of what it's been like, I guess, for the past 3, 4 months,
Are
six
you
months.
expecting your library job to change a lot from what you remember? Like, do you think they're going to
Uh,
have a lot of protocols?
yeah, well, actually, I was talking to my boss recently, and she was saying we'll retrain you in on some of the stuff you already knew, just to like a refresh. But also, there's some new policies we have. They have curbside pickup, which is a new thing. So I'm curious. Like, I don't know honestly because I haven't been down to the library in quite some time, and plus they were closed. Um, are they going to are there going to be patrons allowed in the library? Because if there's not, then that's sort of it's like Uber Eats for a book. It's like it's like, oh, here's a copy of Great Expectations that you ordered like 2 days ago. Are we gonna like start delivering books, or like what's the um protocol there? So I'm curious. That'll change my job a fair amount, because previously when I worked there, I liked interacting with the customer or the patrons at the library, because it's like a lot of them were people that I knew just because of being in a small town, and it was nice to see them. But if that's not the case anymore, I would be kind of sad, just kind of sitting there at the desk and twiddling my thumbs until somebody wants to get a book and I have to run outside and give it to them.
Mhm.
So, and also that presents a unique challenge with how, if somebody doesn't come in, like, do I scan their library card, or like how does that operate? So I'm just kind of curious, like how that's going to work exactly. My thinking is that because of how small of a town we have, I think that there will be patrons allowed in the library, but I think it will just be limited.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of how many people can go into the library, I think the curbside pickup is more for like people who order a bunch of books at once, or like
Mhm.
have like interlibrary loans or what. I don't know. I'm not really sure, but there definitely is going to be some changes for sure of how things operate, and I'll be curious to see what they are.
Mhm. Um, I think that is good. I think we're at a good stopping point. Thank you for agreeing to do this for me. We talked
Mm-hmm.
about a lot and we got a lot of good stuff, so that's really cool. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.
All right.